In today's video, we have all the latest NHL trade talk. We're looking at teams like the Vancouver Canucks and the Montreal Canadiens for some potential offseason moves. We have some free agent rumors surrounding guys like Jerard Klingberg and Phil Kessel. Plus, we have some more updates and more discussion around the future of Ottawa Senators ownership. We have some more injury updates and some signings as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to discuss here today. Let's kick things off with some prospect signings around the league. We have three different players signing ELCs here today, including the Montreal Canadiens signing forward Lucas Condotta, who's basically coming from college on a one-year ELC. He's played 4 years at UMass Lowell, but he is going to report on an amateur tryout. So this ELC will not kick in until next season, but he will be able to go down to Laval for the rest of the season on an amateur tryout. Same goes for Tampa Bay Lightning. They've signed defenseman Nick Perbix, who's a 2017 sixth-rounder out of St. Cloud State. He, of course, has completed his college career and has signed his official pro contract now with the Lightning. And the Edmonton Oilers have signed 2021 first-round pick Xavier Bourgault, who's having a phenomenal offensive season in the QMJHL, putting up over 50 points in 30 games. So he's having a solid year and should be a strong finish for him here as well. So those are your signing updates. We have some pretty significant injury updates here as well. The Carolina Hurricanes have announced that Jesperi Kotkaniemi is going to be out of their lineup for about 2 to 3 weeks. So he's been mainly playing in the bottom six and the fourth line. So obviously that'll change their team dynamic here a little bit. We saw a pretty gruesome injury last night in the Arizona Coyotes game. Forward Clayton Keller went down pretty hard with an injury, going feet first hard into the boards. Ended up suffering a fractured leg. Had to have surgery overnight. He went off the ice via a stretcher, went to the hospital, had surgery, and is done for the year. He's looking at about a 4 to 6 month recovery, so that should get him ready for next year, but it wouldn't be completely shocking if he was even unable to go at the very beginning of the season, because he could even miss parts of training camp. It just depends. If he's closer to the 4 month mark, it'll be a lot more likely that he'll be in training camp and ready to roll. But if it takes closer to the 6, then he could be a little bit delayed starting the year. Of course, we already talked yesterday about the injury to Leafs goalie Peter Mrazek, but we got more details now about what he's looking at. In his regular season is over. He's looking at about a minimum 6-week recovery from a groin strain. So that's bad news for the Leafs goaltending situation that continues to get more question marks. I mean, we saw a time not long ago where there was a lot of question marks near the NHL trade deadline. Kyle Dubas opted to put his faith in Campbell and Mrazek, not making any moves in that area, of course, bringing up Erik Källgren for a few opportunities because of injuries, who actually played well, but it's had a couple of iffy games too, but for the most part, he's been pretty decent. But now Mrazek even though he finally got his playing back together, had a couple of good games for Toronto, and then he got hurt. And now he's going to be out for the rest of the regular season, and he probably wouldn't be available to them the first little bit in the playoffs too. It could even be a little bit longer. So, Källgren's likely going tonight. They called up Hutchison as an emergency basis, but Jack Campbell is expected to be back by the weekend. So I guess their next game here in the weekend is likely going to be Campbell's game. He's technically medically cleared now, but Coach Sheldon Keefe said that because of the lack of practice time, he wanted to give him a little bit longer and get him a full practice before he gets into an NHL game, which certainly makes sense. Make sure he's fully ready and sharp. But they better hope that Jack Campbell can find his early season form and stay healthy, because that could be a huge blow to this team going into the playoffs. So if they already have some question marks, they're not going to have Mrazek to likely start the playoffs. They're going to have to go with the young rookie as a backup to Campbell. We already know that Campbell tends to do best when he doesn't have to, like, the workload's not as big. Like, the more he has to go, eventually he seems to run out of steam and get either hurt or lose his form. I'm not sure what happens there, but he's really needs to be, in my opinion, a tandem goaltender, playing about half the time. It seems to be when he's at his absolute best, but right now they're going to rely on him a lot here down the stretch to try to win as many games, secure hopefully home ice in the playoffs, and then of course play in the playoffs too. So we'll see how that Mrazek injury is going to end up impacting the Leafs, but it's certainly not good at all. And of course, the Avalanche had a good scare with Nathan MacKinnon, of course, going back home to get further testing and evaluation, missing their last game against the Flames with a hand injury after having a fight in the game before that. There was some concern over a potential break or a broken finger, I believe it was, is that what they were worried about. But he seems to be okay now. He was spotted practicing and skating yesterday, and Coach Jared Bednar on a weekly radio hit today did indicate that he is expected to play tonight. So scare averted, and MacKinnon should return to the Avalanche lineup. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of discussions, and I would imagine this is going to be a pretty big topic over the next several weeks and months. I would imagine, after this, I would think there probably won't be a lot to talk about for a little while, but the whole situation involving the Senators' ownership situation after the untimely death of Eugene Melnyk. I know a lot of people in his close inner circle in the league likely knew that his health was failing and that this was, potentially coming soon, but obviously, most fans in the public really had no idea. I don't think many of us would come to be shocked and surprised to find out that his health wasn't the best after what we've seen him go through over the last 6-7 years, but still, we didn't know that he was battling something that, was going to possibly result in his death. So a lot of question marks around this. We did learn some more, a lot more discussions around what's happening here with the team, how it's all going to work. But there's an Athletic article written by Ian Mendez that I went over today. Elliot Friedman talked about it on the Jeff Merrick show, as well as the written version of his 32 Thoughts blog, which came out late last night, which I did see and read through. There's lots of details here and a couple of things that we need to know around how this is going to work. For one, is this doesn't matter if there's a change in ownership, even if it's due to it like being inherited, staying in the family. There still has to be board of governor approval for any kind of ownership change. Quite often, though, we see it's rubber stamped. It's pretty simple. We've seen this happen, like with Detroit, for example, with Mike Ilitch. We've seen it happen in Chicago with the Wirtz family, for example, there. So, those are pretty easy. Nobody ever really even talked about it much because it was just expected that that's the transition phase and that's what was going to happen. But this is a different scenario with Eugene Melnyk's two daughters being very young in their early 20s. So, is it really a situation that they really want to be in, having controlling interest of an NHL franchise? So clearly for right now, essentially the executor of his estate is basically going to be handling a lot. They do have a little board of directors as well, which I believe is a team of 3 people, which will oversee, a lot of the day-to-day stuff as well. And of course, business operations manager Anthony LeBlanc will play a big role as well, and everything should kind of run as usual. Now, I also heard, on top of the Mendez article and the Friedman information, there was also a radio hit, podcast hit, I think it was actually from Renaud Lavoie that I was listening to earlier today. Of course, Renaud is, pretty well connected in a lot of things around the league, works for TVA Sports, and talking a lot about the reports that came out yesterday about the Senators possibly playing some home games in Quebec and that whole rumor and fiasco that came about. Of course, the Ottawa Senators came out and denied everything. Anthony LeBlanc putting out statements that the only discussions they've had is around the World Junior Championships bid, and that they might be looking as an Ottawa-Quebec City joint venture, which to me does make sense. There's some people that say that Ottawa-Gatineau might not be big enough. That I know that the junior team, the Gatineau Olympics, have the arena there. It's fairly new. It's a really nice facility, but it's maybe not quite big enough. But I'm not really quite sure why they would have to have another city jointly host with them. Ottawa has hosted this event before on their own, but it seems to be the way things are going here more as of late. And if you look around, Quebec City does make sense, where they're obviously trying to prove to the NHL that they are indeed an NHL hockey market and deserve to get a team. For them to get a big event like that might help to show that. But according to Renaud Lavoie, he seems to think that there is more to the discussions than just a World Junior bid. He said he got rumblings and heard a few things that were passed along to him about a month ago about this possibility. And it sounds to me like Ottawa was looking at it strictly from a revenue perspective. As I talked about in the last couple of days here, since all this has gone down, yesterday's video especially, that essentially they would probably be looking for the city of Quebec and like the whole Videotron Center, etc., like to be paying them a pretty penny to do their games there if they did. I mean, they're probably going to want a big enough amount of money to be bigger than their largest gate in Ottawa. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for them to consider it. But essentially, it's kind of a case of the Gary Bettman seemed to be the biggest one involved with trying to encourage this. And I think it could be for a couple of reasons. One, as I said, it wouldn't surprise me for Bettman to be kind of using some scare tactics, saying, like, we know attendance in Ottawa has been bad. This might wake up the fan base a little bit to say, well, we don't want to lose our team. Maybe we need to get out and support it more. So there's that aspect of it. And then there's also the aspect of kind of seeing, giving Quebec a little bit of a chance and saying, well, we kind of need to see some proof here that this could work. So the best way to do that, obviously, would be to put some games there and see how they do. So it's kind of a two-prong potential approach. But according to Lavoie, that information that came out in the article yesterday talking about all this was likely leaked by one of the interested parties that wants to buy the Senators, trying to sabotage the deal. Because essentially, obviously when you're talking about business and you're talking about making a major purchase, you're looking at making trying to get the best deal you can. And clearly, something like that would be obviously upsetting to the fan base, for one. Secondly, yes, could it generate money? But, obviously the more money the team makes, maybe you won't get quite as good of a deal. I don't know. But I know Ian Mendez in his Athletic article estimated that if the Sens are indeed sold, that the likely total value or asking price would probably come in somewhere around $800 million. The Penguins were recently sold for $900 million. We saw the expansion fee most recently at $650, and he feels that it's probably going to be somewhere in between, not quite at the higher end, but certainly more than the lower end. And if they end up in any kind of a bidding war with multiple interested parties, then maybe it goes up a little bit. Now, of course, to say that doesn't mean 100% it's even going to happen. We don't know the wishes yet of Melnick's daughters. He might even have it built into his estate that the family has to maintain some sort of minority interest if they do want to sell the franchise. So they could still be minority owners and sell a majority stake. So it's kind of hard to say how this is all going to work out. There's still lots that we don't know. And until his daughters decide to kind of make a decision on how they want to do things, I don't know how quickly this is going to go. And of course, there's the whole lawsuit that's pending from Jim Ruddy and Trinity Developments as well, which, based on the article from Ian Mendez in The Athletic, makes it sound like it may not actually be tied directly to the hockey club, and then it's might not really impact things so much as we thought. So anyways, we'll have to wait and see on that, because that's not scheduled to even hit the courts until the fall. And, could there be some kind of other agreements? Many feel that the recent open bidding that was put out by the city of Ottawa for putting an arena at LeBreton Flats, that they did submit a bid. We'll find out. The cutoff here was just a short time ago. But did Melnick and the Senators get a bid in for the arena downtown again before his passing? I'm not sure. Many people are convinced that it likely happened, but I don't know if anybody can verify and prove that right now. And obviously could be a big part of it. But I know, like, many Ottawa local media are insistent here that the team's not going anywhere. There's no reason to think that they would. The only reason it would come to it would have to be a case where the team was for sale, and that nobody locally wanted to buy it and keep it there. We've seen how much the Senators have kind of had their ups and downs, but at the end of the day, we've seen what Gary Bettman has done for the Coyotes. I would imagine he would fight for the same thing. At least you would hope so. So there's no danger. The Senators aren't going anywhere, but there's lots of question marks. Over the next few months, there's probably going to be a hot topic around the league on how this is all going to work moving forward. Now, on to the trade section of the day. A few things here. A lot of this information comes from the Jeff Merrick show today, where Elliot Friedman was on board for his daily visit, and some of it was actually from Vancouver media as well. Let's start with the Canucks, and then we'll get into all the information that came from Friedman. Essentially, we've seen Vancouver media talking recently. I believe it was Patrick Johnson, I think, in the Province, the article that was talking about the future of Brock Besser, and of course, as well as JT Miller, talking about the Miller contract, which can be extended this offseason, is likely going to end up being similar to the Mika Zibanejad contract, looking at 6, 7, 8 years, around $8 million or so dollars. So that's big money. So for the Canucks to take that on, clearly they'd have to shed money elsewhere, which we already know that Alvin and Rutherford were already looking to do. Now, they talked a lot about the future of Brock Besser, saying that he might have to be a casualty, but there also, Vancouver media seems to be convinced that even though he's owed a qualifying offer of $7.5 million, that there's no way they're signing him to that contract. Like, he's not worth $7.5 million based on how he's played here. So either they come to terms, if he's willing and able, on a lesser dollar value, which I don't know how agreeable he's going to be to that, or he might be traded. The other option is they trade Connor Garland, but who apparently was getting a lot of talk around the deadline, lots of interest, and there was some close calls there. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's revisited. But to get Miller signed in the long term, if he's really your best forward, the heartbeat of your team, if you really want to get that done, that $7.5 million qualifying offer for Boeser is going to be a real problem. And like I said, if you don't feel he's worth it, you're not going to not qualify him because he becomes a UFA and walks away. So either a trade happens or you try to negotiate with him for less, but he and his agent may or may not be open to that. Only time will tell. But, the Canucks slowly kind of creeping their way towards being eliminated from the playoffs. I would imagine those discussions are probably going to pick up here in the not too distant future. Now, on to the other information here that came from Friedman and Merrick. They talked a lot about John Klingberg being a pending UFA here and where he might end up. And I know Jeff Merrick was talking about possibly the Montreal Canadiens because that he says that they are very much expected to trade Jeff Petrie, and he could kind of be Petrie's replacement on a newer contract. Hard to say how long they sign him for. I don't know what kind of deal he's looking for, but it was reported before that he was looking for a long-term deal around $8 million a year. I don't know if that really makes a ton of sense for the Habs going through a rebuild here with Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton. But, it sounded, though, based on the whole Petrie part of this conversation, is like they were, it kind of made me think that is there something kind of already worked out, kind of in place that this deal is going to happen later, because they seem pretty convinced that Jeff Petrie will indeed be traded. I had mentioned before maybe the Detroit Red Wings being a good landing spot for him, and maybe we'll see that happen, but they're very certainty on that. And of course, Klingberg, they felt, would be a great addition to the Seattle Kraken. Of course, they desperately need some offensive players with the Kraken. They sold off a lot of assets here at the deadline. The team has been struggling to score all season long, which has been a big part of their downfall. They had a hard time getting a save early on, but goaltending seems to kind of have settled here a bit. We saw some moves on the blue line. They're going to definitely need some help back there. And having a strong guy like Klingberg who can be a power play quarterback would go a long way to really helping that offense. You need to, if the defense can't get the forwards, the puck can kind of be part of that driving the offense here. It does, have an impact, and that might be a good place for them to start, especially on a guy like Klingberg, who they have lots of cap space. They have, the desire, the need. We'll see where it goes, but he could very well be a good fit there. And Friedman also goes on to talk, too, about, mentioned in his blog and talked about it briefly on the show today, about Phil Kessel coming close to going to Nashville at the NHL trade deadline. Apparently, that he believes the Preds were one of the main teams that were interested in acquiring the longtime NHL winger, of course, who's got quite the Ironman streak going, but never pulled the trigger. So clearly, Phil is a pending unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. He's certainly not going back to Arizona. We know that much is a given. I would think at this point in his career, he'll likely sign a shorter term contract, probably less money than he's making now, clearly, because obviously he's still semi-productive, but not at the point he was when he signed that contract. So certainly it's going to be less term and money. And you have to think if the Nashville Predators were that much interested at the deadline, maybe it's something they'll reconsider here, depending on how things go for the rest of the year and into the playoffs for the Preds. Assuming they clinch a spot, they might want to revisit that, but we don't really have any kind of clear indications really on where Kessel might go. That's the only team we've really had mentioned as really being linked to him. So certainly there's some more players to keep your eye on here for the NHL offseason. You got to keep in mind, I know somebody left a comment earlier saying the trade deadline just passed. Why are we talking about trade rumors? It's like, well, do you realize that the regular season for half the league is done in like a month? So that's, 16 teams that are not going to be playing hockey anymore are going to be working on their offseason moves. There's bound to be lots of talk about what they're going to do when it comes to free agents, contracts, re-upping their players, making trades, etc. There's all kinds of stuff out there. We're really not that far away when you really think about it. And then as teams are slowly eliminated from the playoffs, we'll start hearing more and more about what their plans are and, what they might be up to here as well. So certainly, just because the deadline has passed, doesn't mean that the rumor mill has slowed down any, because the offseason's not that far away. So let me know your thoughts on what we discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.